Hello, everyone. You're with Hanney and Bob tackling yet another challenging topic. Bob, the last couple of weeks we've tackled racism and homosexuality, and although people think there are abundant of evidence, there's heaps of these incidents, but even though we found traces, but they were not as prevalent as many would have thought, especially when it comes to homosexuality and the story of Lot and racism and maybe the story of Noah. I think could be a little bit twisted and taken out of context. But sexism is a slightly different story.
Yeah, the one thing to admit the obvious is that the Bible was written in a patriarchal, androcentric culture, as apparently most of the ancient world was. There is some reason to think that there were matriarchal cultures, but I personally am dubious about the claims you sometimes hear that matriarchy was a kind of primordial paradise state, and then those darn males took over. That's like the golden age myth that many ideologies posit. They're trying to say that our culture is given the lie, is refuted by knowledge of the past when we were closer to nature, human nature, and all that. And so they think they're opposing, you might say, nature to culture. But in fact, since there is no way to know what early civilizations were like in any detail, what we're doing is to oppose to culture counterculture. And we're trying, like, it's analogous to a denomination that ran a college that I used to teach for down here in North Carolina, Mount Olive College. They were part of a denomination called the Original Free Will Baptists. Why did they call themselves that? Well, because they had split from the parent denomination that was the North Carolina Convention of Free Will Baptists. But here you had the offshoot using the word original. Like, we're closer to the source, even though we're a subsequent branch on the tree. People keep thinking that way. It's like a one-upmanship thing, I guess. So some say, yeah, there was a primordial egalitarian matriarchy. That might be a contradiction in terms. I mean, if you have one group in charge, I don't know if it's egalitarian, but and then it failed when men took over. And again, there is real evidence for something like that. It looks kind of like in ancient Greece, for instance, and maybe India also. There were mother goddesses that were simply the gods at one point. And then invaders swept through, the so-called Aryans, who swept through and took over and brought their own male gods, because they were patriarchal. They brought them and kept the goddesses, but as just appendages, just the wife. I always hate to hear guys refer to their wife as the wife, as if it's some sitcom thing, but it's dehumanizing. But yeah, there's some evidence for that. Like in the Bible, for instance, Eve is pretty clearly the same as the goddess Heba or Hebe or Eva. They're all like just linguistic variants. And she also appears as Cybele in the Phrygian religion of Attis and Cybele and so on. And she's in Greek myths. She was one of the wives of Hercules and so on. In Genesis, it says that the man called his wife Eve, for he said she's the mother of all living. Well, another one of these versions of the goddess, Oruru, went by the title the Mother of All Living. So they haven't really forgotten that. But look what's happened in the Eden story, where uh, Jehovah, he's created the man. There's not even a name yet because he can just say, "Hey, you," and only one guy will turn around. Me. But Adam means the man in the sense of the human being. It's a generic term. And he makes him to be the caretaker of the oasis of the gods, the Garden of Eden. There's the tree of life from which the gods eat to renew their immortality, and the tree of knowledge, which implies a lot of things, but here the focus is on carnal knowledge with a view to reproduction. And Jehovah says, you can eat of the tree of life. He doesn't want to have to replace the gardener. Just you can live as long as I do, but keep your mitts off of the tree of knowledge. Well, why? He says, well, you see, it's poison, and if you take a bite of that, and you're dead. He doesn't say he's going to punish him. He says it's poison. Because when the serpent shows, well, then he makes the woman to keep the man company, because there's apparently not a lot of work to do, and the animals are not fit company. They can't speak like the man can. And so he says, well, maybe I should kind of clone him and make another one like him from a piece of him. And sure enough, bingo, that works. But he doesn't say to the man and the woman, be fruitful and multiply, right? That's in the priestly creation account in chapter 1, where there's no fall of the human race, anything like that. In the Garden of Eden story, we've now got the two humans, and there's no plan for them to reproduce. And once the serpent says, hey, you're not getting the whole story. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, it won't poison you. But I tell you what will happen, your eyes will be open and you'll be like the gods. And then the narrator says, when the woman saw that the fruit was good for food, in other words, not poison. I mean, what else does that mean? And it was desirable to make one wise. She went ahead and took a bite and gave some to her husband who was with her. And then the narrator says their eyes were opened. And then Jehovah, who has to be taken as basically reliable, he sees what happens. I love this scene. He shows up in Eden for his evening walk because it's in the cool of the day. And he always fraternizes with the man and the woman, but they're nowhere to be found. He says, hey, where is everybody? Like there's no omniscient deity here. It's an old myth. And they peek up from the bushes and they say, we were afraid to show ourselves because we're naked. You weren't even supposed to notice that. I mean, do animals run around looking for clothes? Who told you this? And he said, I bet you ate of that fruit I told you not to eat. Well, yeah, the woman whom you gave to be with me, she's the one that put me up to it. And she said, the snake, it's his fault. And what does God do? It's too late. They now know reproduction, and that's a threat to the gods. There are already gods, plural. And because who's he talking to? He says, oh boy, their eyes have opened. They've become like one of us. Now, lest they eat of the tree of life and live forever, which would have been okay otherwise, let's get them the heck out of here. Why does that upset the deity? Well, because if they have immortality and the knowledge that the gods share, they're going to be gods, and there'll be an endless number of them. Just like the gods have reproduced themselves, but they've kept the lid on it, apparently. So they're jealous and threatened. And so what does he do? Well, I can't undo what you kids and the serpent did, But I'll tell you this, the punishment's going to fit the crime. You, Missy, will have pain in childbearing. I mean, that's what you're able to do now. It's going to happen, I know that, but you're going to wish it didn't. You're going to have labor pains and all that. And you're going to be subservient to your husband. That wasn't part of the deal when he made her, right? He made a helper, a companion appropriate to him, it says. The word helper, eitzer, appears, I think, about 11 times in the Old Testament. It never means a flunky or a slave or something. It means someone who comes to your aid. And 10 out of the 11 times it refers to God. He is my helper. Like Ebenezer, hitherto hath the Lord helped us. He's not subordinate to you. And King David is number 11. He's nobody's slave. So this is very interesting because I say in the original plan, man and woman would have been equal colleagues. But now you've gone off the track, and I'm afraid you're going to be a slave to your husband. And what they have in mind, of course, is the domestic family unit. Who does the chores? Who does the child nurturing? Who does the dishes? And as opposed to the hunter-gatherer in the family. And you, Guy, it's not going to be so easy as picking fruit off a tree anymore. I'm kicking you out of here, and you're going to have to struggle to get the food out of the ground, and you will eat bread in the sweat of your face. So you shouldn't have done this. I'm not going to kill you and start over, but you might wish I did. And so I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting to the punchline here, but the idea is they were supposed to be equal. Women are subordinated now, and it's their own fault is the idea. I used to explain this in class in my college courses, and I'd say, do you think a man or a woman first told this story? And of course, everybody correctly infers it had to have been a man. I mean, after all, the first woman is in effect born from the first man. I mean, that's just the opposite, right? So they're giving the man the seniority, and this comes up in First Corinthians hundreds of years later. So yes, it's patriarchal, but the very story that tries to legitimate that has this uncomfortable awareness that it really shouldn't be that way. That's neglected often. It's like a kind of, it's not simply taken for granted. It's like giving you this argument. So as you might say, well, I don't know why women can't be equal. Well, I'm afraid they can't. They could have been. They were once, but God has now established this order. You think you know better than him? I wouldn't try it.
So, Bob,
so it's a legitimation myth.
Let me now sort of the way I understood this here is men and women, or man and woman, were created to be equal partners. And with the introduction and the awareness and the knowledge of sex and hence reproduction, it created the dynamics within which sexism is going to be fostered. So
that's right. I don't know why they couldn't have had egalitarian marriage. It might have had to do with the natural nurturing role of mothers. I don't know, but there are like related cultures, like Bedouin cultures, where the women are working their butts off all day and the guys are just sitting around drinking and telling stories. I mean, it wouldn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
There were early Christians, though, that did try to reverse it. The Encratites, I think they and the Gnostics, overlapping groups, they understood this story of Eden taken literally. They knew it wasn't about a fall into sin. Originally, apparently, Jews didn't take it that way either. They knew that we're screwed now. And it's because God was jealous, like one of the Nag Hammadi authors relates the story, and he says, "What sort of a God is this? Is he not a malicious grudger?" Well, that's kind of the point. It's very much like the Prometheus myth. The serpent is like Prometheus. Zeus is the god, but he's not that compassionate. And so the Encratites, hundreds of years later, said, maybe to be saved, we've got to do like the prophets Crosby, Stills, and Nash said. We've got to get ourselves back to the garden and undo the original sin, which was sex. And so they said, you've got to renounce sex, and with it the family unit and all the politics that come from that. So they had egalitarian, anarchist, in the sense of no leaders, communities. They were vegetarians because eating meat, killing the animals, was part of the fall, and they practiced voluntary poverty and so forth. It was kind of like the Shakers in modern times, very similar to that. And they were apocalyptic. If you said to them, look, if everybody did what you're doing, there'd be no future generations. In fact, they tasked St. Augustine with that. And he said, yeah, that's no problem. We're expecting the second coming of Christ, so there's not really going to be any future anyhow. But now that was an attempt to undo the sin which had led to the division of humanity into all these ethnicities and the different languages and the wars that came about and the intrafamilial troubles. We can undo that if we'll get back to the primordial pre-sexual innocence of Adam and Eve. And so they understood this exactly. And I think they were correct in their interpretation of it.
Bob, don't you agree with this biblical narrative? We've got two probabilities here. The gods, plural, were incompetent. They really, really wanted to protect humans from the burden of knowledge, but they failed miserably. Or this has been an orchestration all along. This was meant to happen. Because remember, one of the punishments for men and women is their dynamic and struggle to be eager towards one another and create that sexism dynamic, whether they're going to alternate power, matriarchal era, patriarchal era, but there's always going to be that dynamic where men and women kind of love each other, can't live without each other, but there is an intricate power struggle, and that's part of the curse, because otherwise, they would have been fully equal. Sex and reproduction, if it was never around, there won't be anything to sort of wonder about. These are going to be two comrades, two companions, just chatting away in a Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm. But once I don't think it was so much the lust of sex, which Augustine and others said was the sinful part. I think it was reproduction, because that really threw the monkey wrench into it, because now you had different roles for male and female, which you needn't have had originally. But now if the woman is going to nurse the child and so on, you're automatically getting into a division of labor that probably you wouldn't have had without, you wouldn't have these family roles and this hierarchy if you didn't have reproduction. And so I think that was what made the gods upset. It was okay for them to reproduce. After all, they were the sons of God and all that. But they didn't want humans to do it because they'd be threatened. And that's the Tower of Babel thing, right? I mean, that's even more explicit.
Yes.
Jehovah shows up and says, what are these people doing? Look at this thing. It's this tower. It reaches up to the firmament. we got to put a stop to this. He says to the other gods, if they can do this, they can do anything. Where, this is a threat. And so what should we, hey, we could confuse the language so they can't work together. Yeah.
And Bob,
It's like they're insecure. They don't want humans to realize their godlike potential.
and the hell with one of the best human values, the hell and dispose quite easily of human collaboration. There it goes, human collaborations. Right? Well, supposed to be one of our better achievements, but didn't care.
Yeah, it's like you can imagine the work site. Hey, Shem, hand me that bologna sandwich. Hey, I asked for a sandwich, not a hammer. What is going on here? And what a telling myth. This is exactly, I mean, you know who wrote this. It was the priesthood who wanted to keep everybody docile. They didn't want them to know too much because then they'd be on their level. I mean, that's really the analogy for the insecurity of the gods, just like the caste system in India with the Brahmins on top. If you wanted to deal with the gods, you had to go through them. They're the middlemen. Because if you don't, well, the gods are not going to pay you anything.
But you know what's so intriguing, Bob, is actually showing that this knowledge is attainable. So the gods are, because the gods could have been smart all along and say, well, you know what, there is a metaphysical barrier whereby you can never reach our level. But there are every now and then sort of admit there's actually a way for humans to become gods. And they kind of admitting it, afraid and almost like, acting all panicky at times.
Yeah. And why? I think it's just a projection onto the clouds of the privileges of the professional religious caste. It's all priestcraft, as they used to call it. Like I would not reduce religion to that, but that is one of the many abuses that religion gives rise to. I mean, even in any kind of church, like a low church kind of Baptist type thing, Pentecostal, the minister is not supposed to have divine powers like a Catholic priest who has the charism of ordination, and therefore he can do the different sacraments. You could go through the motions, but if you're not ordained as a priest, you're just doing a charade. But in Protestantism, no, there's no such endowment. The clergy is simply a professional who has learned how to do a communion service, a marriage, a funeral, and all that. You could do it, but you'd probably be too nervous that you'd bungle it. But these guys had vocational training. Well, that's helpful. What the heck? But it's easy to say, well, you're going to need this done, and you don't know how to do it, but I do. And it's so easy to see how this becomes a scam.
So let's throw some pre-biblical narrative and maybe a bit of science into the conversation. There's evidence about 12 to 10,000 years ago, we've gone away from being nomadic, traveling hunter-gatherers, where there were no stable societies. We've moved around to where food sources and water sources were. And therefore there weren't a stable system. Languages started, about 50,000 years ago. The vocal cords and voice box and the software in the brain started to work together, giving rise to languages. And that's a significant change, because you can now communicate a lot more effectively and can get things done a lot quicker. Food, cooking, so lots of things have been happening in the background to get us to the moment of, and for the first time, 12,000 years ago, discovered agriculture. And instead of having to worry about our food on a daily basis, we finally found a way to secure one of the biological needs of the foundation of the pyramid of needs: food. Food is secured. And once secure food, and it's somewhere in a location, you want to live close to that location. So you start building settlements. And once you've settled and secured food security and a bit of cohesion in a community, then comes there, okay, we got, guys, we're 50 of us now. That's a big number. We're going to need some rules to live by. And it's been said because of women's fertility, the moon, the cycles, the lunar months, a connection was then established between women's fertility and agriculture and harvesting and things like that. And inevitably, women kind of taken over, not fully as people make it out to be. They were sacred. There are female goddesses, with the ones with large pelvis, given the birth and the sign of fertility, and although you mentioned that even though it's matriarchal society, but it was egalitarian, which is kind of an oxymoron. But I kind of understood it that it's not as revered or as people would think it was. I think women were kind of respected, but they were not to the level of what they're made out to be. I think it was more of a collaboration society, and with a bit of respect for women for being maybe linked to the fertility and the harvest. And apparently that era, so with that era comes two things. Women were kind of not in charge, but they were dominant. And they were quite peaceful because people were exchanging, were living it's kind of in a stable way. But it comes with it something that is going to be later on used against them: possession. Now, finally, there is something to steal and something to fight over. And maybe, and I'll let you maybe then enter with that patriarchal, and obviously with the Yahweh and the patriarchal God's narrative, but there is something worth stealing now that wasn't there before. What do you think of this sort of idea?
Yeah, you could say, well, what would be stopping them from stealing somebody's harvest? But there'd be less perceived need for that, since you could just observe what they were doing and do it yourself, which of course most of them must have done, given the widespread character of agriculture once it started. But I think you're right. What is there to steal? And think of how in Genesis 4 or 5, I forget, Lamech is said to rejoice in the fact that his son Tubal-Cain is a metallurgist, and that he has created weapons so he can kill. And he says, I have slain a man for wounding me, a young man for the same thing somehow. And but now, if Cain be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech will be avenged 77-fold. Well, that's like the arms race, because of course other people, like Tubal-Cain was the eponymous ancestor of the nation of Tubal on the Black Sea that Ezekiel refers to. They were coppersmiths and so on. And so this guy is their culture hero. He's another version of Cain. And who is the young man that Lamech slew? Well, it must have been Jabal, the shepherd. So, and that's another version of Abel. So the same thing happens again. But now he's really got the lethal arsenal, thanks to his genius son. And this also ties in with the knowledge that the gods have that humans might be better off not having, because another version of that is that of the sons of God and daughters of men, which gets a lot of airplay in later works like the Book of Jubilees, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, Enoch, and so forth, where humans learned how to make weapons and the women to use cosmetics and learn the art of seduction. And this was the fall, according to the ancients. And this was knowledge we could have done without. It corrupted us because it made us able to do bad things we couldn't have done before. And that, I think that's kind of a cloud over the Eden story too. That's why, even though it focuses on reproduction, it probably, the knowledge of everything, all things good and evil, and some of that. There's a saying attributed to Jesus by some Islamic source. Jesus says, there are many trees, but not all of them are bear fruit. There are many fruits, but not all of them are good to eat. And there are many kinds of knowledge, but not all of them are good to possess. And so that's, or one of the Proverbs says, with much wisdom comes much sorrow. And all of this it's kind of a pessimistic view of life, but there's certainly plenty of reason for it. And I think you're right. Once you can have, all these neat possessions and this shiny stuff over here, well, there's not really enough of it. So I guess I'll have to steal yours. Maybe we'd have been better off just with coconuts.
Yeah, and once you have that Iron Age and war machine, they weren't you weren't just defending yourself. You weren't actually defending yourself. They were designed for you to attack the neighboring village, for you to take their women and possessions. So that's what it was designed for. And maybe a bit of science here when it comes to, because maybe we need to look into the animal kingdom outside of ourselves, where the male-female dynamic. So in the animal kingdom, we can see that mostly the female chooses the suitors. Mm-hmm. And the males have to look colorful and beautiful. You just have to look at a peacock. The peahen is white and kind of plain. The male have to look very colorful and beautiful. And there's a lot of evidence of that. And it actually happens in a human society as well. You go to your local nightclub, you'll see all these ladies on the dance floor, and the guys are just surrounding them, trying to do all sort of love songs and to attract the different females. So we're not that different. We're just added music in the background. That's all. Bee Gees or something.
Yeah, that's so true. Years ago, when Victoria was yet an infant, we were visiting friends on a trip to New Jersey, a couple from our church, and we went to, it wasn't a disco or anything, but it was some restaurant with a dance floor, and so people were shaking their booties and all that. And we kind of stuck out like a sore thumb because we were a couple of married couples and we had a baby with us. And our friend, the female, she said, really, they don't know it, but they're here to get what you have. They're trying to find a mate. And you cannot tell me the sociobiologists are wrong about this. Why is it that men go for women with the hourglass figure? Well, they haven't got a clue, but evolution selected for guys that would go for this kind of figure because it means she will have plenty of milk to nurse the baby and her hips are wide enough for a successful delivery. Obviously, I mean, it isn't obvious until somebody points it out, but surely that's why we feel that way. If you bracket that, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Why am I attracted? Well, this is why. It's entirely natural to be attracted, but this is why.
And the opposite, I mean, we don't want to stereotype, but the opposite for females, they're looking for males with strong jawbones and you know, wide shoulders, taller, and this is where it comes to this area of physical differences, because the physical difference in species, and sometimes females can be larger than males. So in spiders, you know, with black widows and where you can have a female that is larger than a male, and the dominance sort of shift. So the sizes in some gorillas, the male could be as larger as 2 or 2.5 times of a female, and therefore the silverback, you know, the very dominant male. In humans, the differences are quite subtle. Men are not that they're not as, you know, twice as large as a woman. There is a size difference, but it's not as significant as in the animal kingdom. So the dominance cannot be established through physical stature, and therefore it was delayed. Because it was just purely on physical stature, then you'll see that dominance from very, very early on. But because of the sizes of the sexes were always kind of similar and they needed each other one way or another, the companionship continued. But only with the introduction of psychology and software, where we can write literature that tells us that we're slightly different than you females, and we're supposed to be first, and you're an afterthought. You know, you're here because we're here. We are the Adam. We are from Earth, and then you're from the rib, and you know, so you're important, but not as important as a man. And this gets established, and you're going to tell us maybe a bit on the 10 Commandments. So where, you know, there is a reference in one of the commandments, the coveting situation, where women are clubbed with oxen and houses.
Coveting, you shall not covet your neighbor's lawnmower or his wife. Sheesh.
So the language shifts quite clearly towards it's a man's world and women live in it. And maybe you can tell us about that shift. I mean, definitely with the Old Testament, it comes some references to maybe signal that.
Well, in Proverbs 31, the very last chapter, the whole thing is a kind of a pan to the wifely role. And it says, a good wife who can find? She's rare as gold, and so forth. And then it goes on saying she takes care of the marketing and the sewing and the child rearing. Boy, there's few like that. I'm not sure if like the implication is most of them are a bunch of slobs just eating Malamars and watching soap operas. I kind of don't think that's the point. It probably doesn't intend that contrast. It's just saying, oh man, that is so great. Look how great a wife can be. I guess you could read that a couple of ways, but she does everything a man does, business decisions and so on. And this is way back there. And a lot of the stuff in Proverbs is international in origin. It very seldom says anything about the Torah or Israelites versus non-Israelites. It's cosmopolitan. It's just talking about the human lot and what will make it work well and what will undermine it. And this high regard for women is evidenced there, but you do have other materials where that will enable Tertullian, for instance, later to say, you women were the gateway to sin. You brought death into the world. And you can see where they get it from reading the Eden story, but I think that's well, in a way it's a misreading, but in another way, it's enshrining male chauvinism and male dominance, though with an uneasy conscience, right? Because it shouldn't have been this way, but it is now. So it's a mixed bag, and I think the ultimate thing comes from a kind of strangely enough, a perverse sort of chivalry that men must value women highly as their greatest treasure originally and ultimately so she can produce a male heir, because they didn't necessarily believe in any afterlife, but they wanted to make sure everything stayed in the family. So and if your wife was unfruitful, you could marry another one or have a concubine, because you had to have descendants. And the Levirate marriage law, that was all about that. That's why, as we said a couple of weeks ago, Onan gets whacked by the Almighty, that he refuses to propagate heirs to his late brother by impregnating his wife. So it's like the wife has to be protected. And in some cultures, that goes so far as veiling women, the burqa, the chador, and all that stuff, because you know how we hear some feminists say that it's discriminatory when men, in effect, tell raped women, you asked for it, by dressing seductively. Somebody's got this all wrong. It's why do women wear burqas and looks like garbage bags? You know, they can't enjoy it. Why is it? It's not because the women are such seductresses that if they're not covered head to foot, they'll automatically seduce you just by being there. No, these precautions are taken because they are taking seriously the lustful Neanderthal urges of men. And that's I think that's the neglected thing that shows how this is not sexist. It's saying, it kind of says women are more advanced than men, and we must protect them against male depredation. I personally think Ashley Montagu, the anthropologist, was correct that women are superior to men. They seem to me to be more evolved, more advanced, because ultimately they need men as muscle to protect them and to, bring in the mammoth steaks and all that. So even that goes back to basic biology, and it's sadly it goes overboard. In some cultures more than others, where the woman is a china doll in a box, we got to keep her in mint condition, like she's a prized possession. That starts out with a healthy instinct, but it's like idiots trying to obey it. So it's a tangled thing. It isn't simply that men are all evil. I think men are more childlike and in some ways more animalistic. So yeah, there is a problem. That's why women have been oppressed for so long. So if you want to speak about the patriarchal system, there's certainly truth to that. And then one other thing, and I'll shut up about this.
I agree. Yeah. Sorry, go finish this point, Bob. Yeah.
My New Testament dissertation was a book called The Widow Traditions in Luke Acts, a Feminist Critical Scrutiny. How's that for a mouthful? And what got me started was this observation one sometimes hears, that Luke is the New Testament writer most interested in women. And so biblical feminists, there is such a thing, they like to quote from that and say, you see, not all Bible writers were chauvinists and patriarchalists. Look at the role of women here. But my contention was they're misreading this. Luke uses traditions about celibate, consecrated, charismatic widows and virgins. These were like stipendiary celibate orders that continued in the church for a couple of centuries. And of course, nuns are the modern version of that. But we know that among the Marcionites and others, women could, it was like in Acts, your sons and daughters shall prophesy. And so women could serve communion, they could teach catechism, they could baptize converts. But you start seeing, like in the Lateran is that it? I forget. These councils in the 3rd and 4th century, they're clamping the lid on that. Women have no business doing that. And once you see that, you take a second look at the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, and you see this writer is not in favor of women's ministry. He's shutting them up and putting them down, even if he has to rewrite the original story every he can. And there's a surprising number of these things. So you got a mixed bag. There are bright signals and sparks that somebody understood that in Christ there is no male or female, as in Galatians chapter 3, but a lot of chauvinism that just was part of the inherited culture, and it's taken a long time to try to get past it.
Yeah, I tend to be in agreement. I don't think men were trying to be evil. I think it's more of a clumsy effort to gift wrap the most important thing to them,
Exactly.
and protect it from competition. They want all the women all for themselves, kind of thing. And in a very clumsy way, they end up shooting themselves in the foot, because I don't know if you remember Christopher Hitchens once said, if you want to raise the ceiling of human prosperity and remove poverty, or at least kind of help it, you want to empower 50% of your population, aka women. When you put them down and they're not there to contribute in every single aspect in life, you pretty much depriving yourself from 50% of the resources you've got at hand. So you shot yourself in the foot. Women can do way more. I mean, we're thinking of sex, but you and I can never think like a woman, because we're not wired that way. But I bet you, if you go into a head of a woman, they'll see us in the same way. So if you're attracted to women, they're also attracted to men. If you want to be a father, they also want to be mothers. And for all of these to work, you gotta have the other pair to tango. You cannot have that dance without the other partner. It's just a fight on who is in charge, who's going to be in charge, and it's all right as long as there is no struggle. In my opinion, if there's consent. And there's agreement and who's going to, like in a dance, in a salsa, you don't say, I'm going to be in charge. You start dancing, and one will start guiding the move. And if the other one is all right with it, there's harmony in the dance. And you no longer see who's the boss. If you're looking from the outside, you only see a beautiful dance. The leadership behind the scene becomes so subtle that you no longer see who's leading. A woman can do the same thing, and you won't see it. All what you see is harmonious harvest of that particular move. And sometimes you don't have to say too much about it. The fact that we keep vocalizing, I want to be in charge, and banging your fist, and this is where it becomes really problematic for me. I think, I think there's kind of has to be some leaderships in certain situations, and it doesn't mean that you're controlling or you're overpowering the other person. It's just you want to produce a harmonious piece, and this piece of action requires one to be in charge of certain moves, and it doesn't matter who the party is. You do it, and you do it in a subtle way that it doesn't show, and it's different between a boss and a leadership, I guess.
I really resonate with that, because that's the way it is in my marriage to Carol. She is much more practically oriented than I am, though she's quite brilliant, and was always a philosophy major and taught philosophy to kids. She's got all sorts of great things going on. But I am, like with technology, with financial planning. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. It's the classic. It's a version of the classic nerd thing. All of my wiring is stuffed into the whatever one of the brain hemispheres, so I can write fiction and do scholarly research and all that. But in the real world, forget it. I always have said that if I hadn't met and married Carol, today I would probably be living in a sleeping bag under the escalator at the Port Authority bus terminal. And I've thought for years, to view that this traditional model, well, the man has to be the head of the house. To me, that's not only artificial, but almost crazy. Like, imagine saying, I'm in charge here. It's like Ralph Cramden, like this hilarious Honeymooners episode where he says, Alice, I'm the king of the castle. You can't go to the movies tonight, not for any particular reason, but just because I, the king of the castle, said so. It's so ridiculous, but the whole idea. I mean, that show was really prophetic and great satire of this already. But I think it's sort of crazy to actually say, yeah, the man's the boss. You need a team that cooperates.
I agree. And sometimes you alternate leadership. It depends on certain skill sets. I mean, the ladies bring certain skill sets we don't possess naturally and biologically because of the evolution, because of the wiring. And you ought to take benefit of that. If there is a partnership, let's say I'm good at certain things. In that particular context, I might just for a while take the leadership because I know more about this particular, let's say we're buying a car and I happen to know a lot more about cars, and the wife say, oh, what do you reckon? And he starts guiding the way. But in some other occasion, you'll find yourself asking the wife or your partner, hey, I'm not sure about this here. What's your opinion? And she takes over because that's her set of expertise. And if life works that way, I think we will have no problems whatsoever. Alternating who's in charge of certain situation, not because of their ontology being a man or a woman, is because they are better suited for that particular, maybe based on competency.
Mm-hmm. I think I just tonight on some TV show that why is there a disparity so that there are fewer women proportionately in engineering or something than men? And it's got to be persecution, it's got to be chauvinism. No, it just seems like if you take interest surveys and I guess probably high school or college women, what are you drawn to? What are you interested in? Fewer of them are going to say math and engineering and so on than the men. And there'll be other things. Supposedly women are more interested in literature and so on. Women are more than. I assume that has something to do not just with upbringing, but the inherited psychology of male versus female. And I just don't buy the idea that, oh no, there are no inborn differences. That really gets when you have people, let's give men maternity leave so they can have babies. I think of the Monty Python scene, Stan, why are you always on about the women? Because I want to be one. And he says, I should have the right to have babies. But you can't have babies. Where are you going to keep the fetus? In a box? And then they decide, all right, how about we're working on the platform, front of Judea. And they say, they can't have babies, but and that's nobody's fault, not even the Romans, but they can have the right to have babies. Okay, and that compromise seems to solve the problem. And we're getting to that point of ridiculousness. What is the problem with recognizing the wonderful That's really, I think, stretching it to the into the twilight zone in our modern culture.
Yeah, I think differences are sort of being misunderstood as I think there are biological differences. I don't know.
Mm.
Jordan Peterson, I'm not a big fan of when it comes to the biblical narrative. I think he stretches the um, uh, metaphorical truth too much and the Jungian archetype too much.
I think so too.
Yeah, but he's got some certain points. Like he said,
Mhm.
actually, psychologically, all the psychological mapping shows that women are interested in people and men are
Mhm.
interested in things.
Mhm.
And that's why, and that's reflected in life, in your choices of careers and stuff like that. I think he's got a point. The
Mhm.
problem is, if you take this as an insult and you go, bloody hell, look, he's saying that men are better. No, he's not. In that
Mhm.
context, he's saying we have evolved slightly differently. Our biological makeup, the hormones that sort of govern male versus female, give us benefits in slightly different directions. And actually, you need these two elements to have a complete partnership. It's a great thing that nature give us this sort of uh, different skill sets. Still, women can do most things that, or all things that men
Yeah,
can do,
yeah.
and the on the other way around. But we're talking
Mhm.
now the bell curve. We're talking the median. We're talking about the average
Mm.
differences, and that's a good thing, and it should be celebrated. We've got
Mm.
a partner. So imagine this is a company, nothing to do with male female. Two guys. One is very good at sales and marketing. The other guy is very good at accounting. This is going to be a good company, a good business model, because you.
Mm.
But if you have the two people are interested in the exact one same thing, leaving one area of the business completely exposed, you'll end up with a company that's struggling. So
Mhm.
maybe it's time to celebrate the differences,
Mm.
but understand. I mean, we're talking about equality is no, no starter. This is where equality is granted. This is one thing that is not going to be touched. But
Mm.
let's work on the things that we are good at naturally and emphasize them. Obviously, there will be the exceptions
Mm.
on the bell curve here, right? But right in the middle, you'll have most people will be attracted to certain things. Do we then, artificially go and change? Say no, 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 no. So a lady wants to stay at home because that's what she wants to do. She wants to be a homemaker, look after the kids, and no, you can't do that. Society demands that you go out and seek work because you are not then, you're making us look bad.
Mm.
That's I'm afraid of that kind of endeavor. I think it's going to be counterproductive.
Yeah, oh, it already is. Yeah, yeah. And there's a strange irony in that some feminists, and I can't, I know there are all different categories and waves of it that I don't keep up with, but some seem to think that to be regarded as equal to men, I mean, on the same status, whatever, women have to in effect become men attitudinally, professionally, and so on. There's a mistake being made there. If a woman is inclined, personality wise, skill wise, and so on, to take the same role a man is more often taking, no problem. But to think that unless she does, she's just some domestic slave. That's a very dangerous thing, devaluing family and child rearing, and that really is going to be terrible for the culture. The more it happens.
Yeah, I tend to be in agreement. There are a few people I think misreading. I'm reading some of the comments. I think people are going to helplessly misread what you and I are trying to say, and I'm hoping that's not the case because we are obviously not trying to sell a case of sexism here, but an understanding of the human condition so we can actually work accordingly instead of having to swim against the current.
Mm,
Um, there is a certain disposition. So, there are Soren is saying here, for example, uh, and this is where the play on words becomes very, becomes a game that is very difficult to play. So saying, we said we should celebrate our differences. He said, no, it's acknowledge our differences, not celebrate them. What's wrong with celebrating the differences? What's wrong? So if you are going to have a gay parade, right? Which is Pride Parade, because these people have been suppressed for ages and they want to show who they are. What's wrong with being comfortable with who you are and be proud of it, and every now and then celebrate it? I'm not saying like, you throw yourself a party, but just, the word celebrate here means to be comfortable with your nature and be proud and wear it proudly for men and women. That's what I meant to say. So I'm hoping that people are not going to misread this into an area where we're saying still the men kind of better. Women are great, but men are still better. We're not saying that at all. That's just out of the question. We're just acknowledging and understanding that there are differences, and these biological differences are going to lead to different choices in life, and whether these choices should be free, or should we direct them in a certain way because society is pushing you in a certain direction to achieve a certain narrative. That's what we're afraid of. So let's take it to the modern era. Now we've talked, it's very obvious. The biblical narrative is just a human endeavor, right? We're writing our history. So all these holy, sacred books are just the biography of humanity, if you wish. We are saying, forget about the gods. We're saying what we were doing at the time. And we've shifted to men being in leadership to the point where it became kind of sickening. You've got rules where, we talked about the biblical terms where women are looked at as second-class citizen. Your men comes first, and there are a lot of signs of that. But let's go to Paul. Was Paul's writing and being attributed to be a bit of a chauvinist? Is one of his authenticated writings or one of the forgeries of his letters?
Well, it does look like the more chauvinistic stuff is in either the pastoral epistles or what Winsome Monroe calls the pastoral stratum. That is probably the same author of those three pseudonymous pseudo-Pauline epistles is responsible for several interpolations detectable by their vocabulary, their style, their interruption of the context, of the flow of the argument, etc. This does seem to, like, that's where you find the thing in 1 Corinthians 14 that women should be silent in church. If they want to know something, let them wait till they get home and ask their husbands. Whereas earlier in the epistle, the writer says women prophesy. They just need to be veiled, and then he gets into this weird thing about the fallen angels lusting after humans and so on. But even in 1 Corinthians, he says, like, he's trying. It's really fascinating. He's trying to say that he's just Christ, head of every man, and man is the head of woman. And this is obviously a patriarchal, hierarchical thing. But then he says, because after all, it was man who was created first, not woman. He backtracks and says, well, they'll come to think of it, ever since men are born from women, and what the heck, in Christ, everybody's equal. It's as if he just kind of sees that this is a dead end and it's okay, forget I said it. It's one of the few places you have something like that in there. But there's this thing probably based on a baptismal formula where he says that you're all one in Christ. This is the Encretite idea, by the way. If you're baptized into Christ, the second Adam, all of these differences that sprang from Adam and Eve are reversed. And so the differences are irrelevant. There is no Jew or Greek, no slave or free, no male, female. We don't know how he thought that would be put into practice. Does he just mean all of these are accepted by God? Or did he mean that there's no reason men and women can't do the same stuff in church? We know some of his fans thought that, and it kind of implies that. In Romans 16, he mentions a couple, Andronicus and Junia, whom he says are noteworthy among the apostles. In other words, Junia is a female apostle. That doesn't mean she's one of the 12. There were other apostles. That's kind of startling. He also in Romans 16, it's like a little letter of recommendation for a woman named Phoebe, who he says is a deacon of the church in so and so, not deaconess, but a deacon, a minister of the church. So there's several little places where it seems like of women having an equal role in ministry, and some of the stuff where it seems like he is saying the opposite on other grounds looks like it's somebody trying to domesticate Paul and make him sound more this always happens in sectarian movements. They're radically egalitarian at first, but then when you start having kids and having to send them to school and pay taxes, you inevitably creep back toward the norm that you once repudiated. And that's what you have in like the pastoral epistles and these interpolations. In fact, one of the most outrageous things is in I can never remember if it's 1st or 2nd Timothy, where it says that women will be saved or kept safe through childbirth if they stick to their domestic duties. I remember reading that once, sitting on a park bench and thinking, what? This is baloney. And that was one of the big things that made me consider the whole biblical. Now I don't even see it that way. I'm free to see that there are different writers with different perspectives, and some who wrote in Paul's name chauvinistic. Luke was chauvinistic for sure, in my opinion, but there are these several little bits where Paul seems to say women have the same rights in ministry as men. It's pretty startling. Oh yeah, one other thing about that. He says he's trying to get tights, again, the celibacy. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, not to, the husbands and wives should not say, this makes sense to me. I'm going to renounce sex and become more holy. Just don't do that unilaterally. You've got to make an agreement with your spouse, or what's going to happen. He's off to the brothel or whatever, or as an adulterer. No, don't do that. Why don't you ease into it if you have to do it? And he says, because the wife's body belongs to her husband, and the husband's body belongs to his wife. So you have to give each other your rights sexually, he means. To me, that is amazing to find in an ancient writing. So you do have a mixed bag, and not all of it is that bad.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of reflections of today's society. You still have that mixed bag. It still persists. Yeah. So even in the ancient world, there seems to be some people who are like in today's world. Thank you so much, Robert Herring, for your support, mate. It still persists. You have people who, that verse you talked about almost like a subtle threat of you might die if you're not going to devote your life to looking after the children and look after home. It's almost like a threat, because that's the preference. Men want somebody to look after the home affairs so they can go out and do whatever they want to do. And you still have that to date. And there are people out there who don't have a problem. They're confident enough to share the leadership of society in the home, with their life partners, and they're comfortable with that. They're confident males. So the problem still persists, but without, I don't think a conversation about sexism won't be complete, because we're going to have to address and this is going to get awkward and quite political, feminism. So as a response to, and there are a few ladies that might going to be listening to us later on, and they're going to be maybe offended just before we utter a word.
Say that again, Hanney. I didn't quite hear.
Feminism. I want to talk about feminism as a reaction to sexism. Like, okay, well, we can establish that there are male chauvinists in society. There are sexist. We're talking about women didn't have the right to vote until like 100 years ago. Certain rules were still ridiculous. Look at the Arabic world at the moment in this state of women. It exists. Mm-hmm. But the response to that, what kind of response to that? I think the whole society needs to rally. But do you think, and there are two types of feminism. There's a feminism that is quite educated, that does not put males as an enemy, but rather as ignorant, and say, well, you've got this all wrong. These are the reasons women should be equal, and make sort of an intellectual case for it. And then on the other hand, you've got the extreme side that will go to the point of demonizing masculinity and being a male. It's as if it's a curse. Mm-hmm. There's some toxic for sure, but is every male kind of toxic by birth? Just for the biological accident that we were born males, we should be condemned for it. What is your view on that?
Yeah, that's sexism too. A sweeping generalization like that. I think that's might be a kind of feminism, but it surely is not egalitarianism. And there are radical feminists. I've read Shulamith Firestone, Dialectic of Sex, and other ones with great interest. And it's not unknown to read or hear women saying, oh boy, it'll be soon now that we can have kids from test tubes without fathers, because we don't want them, we don't need them. That seems to me to be neurotic and extreme. I understand the product of abuse, and the pendulum's not going to stop in the middle the first time. But I like another problem is, some will say, if you didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, you're not really a woman. Well, what are you saying there? That you have to be a Democrat or a political liberal or whatever to be a real woman? That's a rhetorical stunt. Derrida talks about that. When you say A is B, you're trying to claim for A what really is true only of B. But if you can pull that off, you now have the good associations of B or the bad ones, and it applied to A. For instance, that thing was one with for Hillary, a woman at any rate, or not a woman. Aren't there other issues involved? Or the one that really gets me is it's assumed that if you oppose abortion, you certainly are no feminist. Well, I do not call myself a feminist because I am against abortion. And if others insist they have the copyright on the term feminist, well, okay, I don't want to make trouble. But I believe that women are probably to men. I've always told my daughters that you are at least the equal of any man. That's my true belief. And of course, I think men and women should be compensated the same for the same work. I have
Mhm.
hesitation about being governed by women. I don't know that anybody does anymore. And but yet people will say, "Oh, but you've got to believe in abortion. You got to support." I'm sorry. I have tried to see and accept that position. I just do not find it convincing, and
So
I
yeah,
find
Bob, you're utterly anti-abortion.
yes. And
Fully.
but I know some will say, "Oh no, it's a woman's body." Well, it's not technically because the fetus has a different genetic code than you do because two sets of chromosomes merged, right? So I am really against it. I think it's at least a kind of second degree murder or
So
manslaughter. But
how about tackling this next week,
man, sure.
and and I'm going to try and change your mind.
Well, sure.
I am pro, but not an absolutist. I think there are borders, not like an absolute. I can do it anytime. There are certain intricacies in there, but that'll be quite an interesting dialogue because I want to hear. Even though I've taken that position, to the astonishment of some, I would love to hear from somebody I respect and like so much the opposite opinion of mine, to open my eyes to something new that maybe I have not thought about. I'm not afraid of that. I think it will be a brilliant conversation to talk about
That's
abortion.
because you're an intellectually honest person. I mean, you always have. I seek out positions that sound strange to me because I realize there must be a method to the madness. There must be somebody finds this cogent. I don't get it. Let me see if I can understand it. And I've changed my mind on things looking at it that way before. Uh, from uh, uh, from the idea of homosexuality in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, used to think, well, obviously, I did some reading. Oh no, it's not about that at all. How could I not see that? Or deconstruction. I used to think that was crazy, and if you accepted it, you're crazy. But then I thought, no, wait a minute. These are sophisticated, smart people that are playing some kind of a game. There must be rules to this game that I don't understand. And so I studied that and I wound up saying, I think this is great. I never thought it would happen, but I want this. That's a way to learn. Let's look at the offensive, confusing, baffling thing. What are you missing? There must be something, and maybe you can find out. Maybe I
Exactly.
can find out.
Because that's obviously, and that will follow quite nicely through from sexism, because we were talking about the
Mhm.
female body, and you've made a point, but with a significant contribution from a male partner. So there's a bit of a balance here to achieve, right? It's interesting. It's going to be an interesting conversation, and it's quite, and things would dismiss that straight away as, oh, it's got to be that. But once you throw a bit of science, once you throw a little bit of philosophy, human rights of males, females, how to envision a better future society, all of that has to come in context. Family, is guarding a family important? Are we heading to a world where the word monogamy is going to cease to exist, and we're opening up to a polyamorous world where the traditional marriage is going to cease to exist because of different directions. These are very, very interesting conversations to have. And it might decide our future. What we were going to be doing today and tomorrow is going to be deciding our near and far future. So it's definitely worth having that conversation. Now, final few words on sexism. So your equality of pay. If you're doing the same job, it doesn't matter if you're a man or woman. The salary is attached to the job description. Yeah, out of the way. That doesn't even need thinking, right?
Yeah, it seems self-evident. I don't understand what the...
Yeah. Same here. I never understood why. I think it's more evident. I think it was a big saga in the U.S. Soccer team. And I think it was linked to a certain intricate income and marketing situation where male soccer is watched by way more people, generating more revenue. So if you're running it as a business model, you are looking at Microsoft versus a Joe Blow company, where you can be paid for the same job twice the amount at a Microsoft than a smaller company, even though you're doing the same job, just because you're working for Microsoft. They want the best and they want to hire the best. So this was the argument made that men's football are watched by way more people, generating more money. But then you're going to end up, why are male football are watched by more people? Because they had an early start. They started first. They've gathered and they've got their momentum. Female soccer is in sort of a new entry. It's gathering a lot of momentum, and maybe they get there one day. But is it driven truly by because they're women, we have to pay them less, or because the revenue comes from their endeavor or sporting activities generate less money, and therefore they're compensated accordingly? See, that's an interesting.
I think that whether it should be or not, I think the latter is the case, and it's the same sort of thing that explains why teachers are paid nothing compared to professional athletes. Are they less valuable? No, but there's a greater interest. Maybe we should discuss that. I have no interest in sports at all. I don't look down on those who do, but I'm missing the gene. But people worship sports stars, and there's such interest, and people will pay big bucks to go to the Super Bowl and all this. It's like what the market will bear. So I don't think that is discrimination, and it might be even more dangerous to start having the government by fiat control salaries. But that might be fair. I don't know. I mean, if you start professional tiddlywink matches, would you say that they have to be paid the same as NFL players? Beats me.
Interesting conversation. I mean, some soccer players at the moment earn just pure salary, $500,000 a week. A week. Basic salary. So they get bonuses when they score goals. They get endorsement, advertisement. These guys might have up to $2 million a week of salary. $2 million. And you compare them to an academic professor at a university. I mean, this is going to be laughable. But then you'd argue then, do we need the entertainment, and what does the entertainment do to our human cohesion society? You know, watching a football game, 100,000 people rallying your nation, it might have a different value. Education is very important, but we know we haven't evolved and survived as a human species because we know better. It's just because we stuck together. And maybe sticking together, we're still that biological animal that we need to have a pack to stick to, and knowledge becomes secondary. Very interesting conversation, though. And once you zoom out the camera, you realize it's not just about sexes. Then it's more to do with a lot of other dynamics, and there's a lot that can meet the eye there.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh boy, one thing interlocks with another. It's beyond my poor brain.
the network of human society is almost as complex as our brain network. The amount of intricacies, they're all sort of involved in affecting one another, even in the background while you're not. I mean, I know I'm speaking right now, and I'm not even aware of my own biases and my blind spots. I'm trying to be aware of them and see them, but you misspeak or you say something, and I can't help it. I'm only the product of my own brain that I've inherited.
That goes to this thing we briefly discussed, free will. Some recent study shows that by looking at the illumination of the brain as the electric pulses travel along the synapses or whatever the heck it is, they say you actually have made a decision as to what you're going to do before you become aware of it. And
That's
you say,
true.
yeah, this is what I'm going to do, but it's not that you felt that resolve like pre-psychologically, your brain somehow already made the decision. Well,
Correct.
that's kind of frightening. It's like your conscious mind is controlled by your subconscious. Is that even what we're talking about? Or should
Yeah.
you look at it holistically and say, no, it is my decision. This is how they are made. But that doesn't really work. That
No, but you
is,
see,
it does imply, that
your
this
subconscious and
is
preconscious.
epiphenomenal.
Yeah, the subconscious and the preconscious are the storage of where your conscious moments go into eventually. So when you make a decision, and it's true, between half a second and up to 5 seconds before you think you've made a decision, the decision was already made in your neurological mind. But that is based on other experiences that you've already sort of accumulated over time. It just gets stored in a kind of a robotic memory, so you don't have to keep exerting pressure all the time using calories and energy. So, and that's why you can drive one day and you get to where your destination and you go, bloody hell, I can't even remember driving for 20 minutes. And it's almost like all these skills were autopilot. You weren't even aware that you were thinking about, oh, I need to get this in the shopping, I need to do this tomorrow. And all of that while you're changing gear and changing speed and being kind of aware there's a green light here and red light there. You're doing all of that, but you're not even doing it on a conscious level. You're doing other things. So we keep storing things like that in a robotic sort of memory, so that we exert less pressure on our brains and being able to multitask and deal with other maybe newer situation, and that situation of driving a car can be completely reversed if it's your first week learning how to drive a car. You become fully aware, you're very vigilant, you're wanting to know every little move and why you're making certain decision. That's after a month or two goes into your autopilot memory, and the human brain is such a machine. It's an incredible thing.
It's sort of like muscle memory.
Yes.
It's like you're calling out the answer to that question. Like it's as if you're doing math problems. You no longer need to think 2 and 2. Yeah, that's 4. Maybe decades ago you did, but so often you don't have to figure it out. You just know it. And like with me, what do I want for dinner? Pizza, of course, or fried chicken. I mean, it's not the outcome of a long process. It just leaps to mind, and that's I think it is. I think that it's kind of like what Leibniz said. He said that everything, in a sense, is predestined, but that ain't bad, because what it means is you are following the law of your own nature. You're not. Freedom doesn't mean spastic chaos.
Mm-hmm.
It may mean you are free to obey the law of your own nature, your likes and dislikes, your instincts, and so forth. And like again with pizza, if Carol comes in here and says, well, I know we've had it a couple of times this week, but let's order a pizza. Is there the slightest possibility that I'll say, no, let's have something else? No, of course. Anybody that knows me knows I would have the pizza. There's not a chance that I wouldn't. And so I am obeying automatically, robotically, the law of my own nature, because I am embracing it. I never feel like, yeah, let's have some kind of vegan slop. That never is going to happen. There's not a chance in hell that will happen. And it's this automatic autopilot thing.
Yeah, fair enough. See that. So we've got abortion. I think we can tackle free will, because free will will have a lot of repercussions on things like heaven and hell. Because if you don't have free will, what the hell God is judging you on? And there might be some biblical narratives where free will is questioned, whether we are predetermined, is this the will of Allah, or is it your will, and why we are judged on if we don't have one. And maybe a third one you've just give me the hint about, which is I'm vegetarian. I've become vegetarian in the last couple of years.
I thought you might be, but I figured you wouldn't mind.
But I'm not vegan. I'm vegetarian, and I'm not a warrior. Like, those people say, oh, you're a murderer and that type of thing. But this is another conversation to talk about, because I am 50, and it took me some 47 years to struggle with that, because I've always, not 47, but I've struggled. Let's say the last 20 years, I've been trying and I'm failing. So I love meat. I love meat. Like, absolutely. I'm the guy who would have had lots of meat and a bit of salad and a side of salad, and that's it. I skip pasta and all that sort of crap. So to move to that, and it's nothing to do with diet or anything, it's to do with suffering. That's all. But that's a conversation to have.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Once I heard Charles Krauthammer say on TV that he believed there is this dawning realization in the human race that it is cruel and inhumane to kill animals, eat them. But he said, though he thinks it's moving in that direction, it's too late for him. He's just not going to be able to make that transition. But the collectively, I feel exactly that way. There's Strauss said that the reason we, in an essay called The Raw and the Cooked, he said, why do we cook food? Well, it's to hide the fact that it was living matter, because we'd be squeamish about that. But if we can seem to change it into something else, we won't have the qualms of conscience, though we know good and well where it came from. Well, that's me. I admit I am a hypocrite on the matter. If I had to kill animals to get meat, I'd be a vegetarian.
Yeah,
tomorrow.
I know what you mean.
I don't have to.
Yeah, if you go to a supermarket and you pick a T-bone steak that's sitting in there, it's called a T-bone, or it's a ribeye. But imagine you go into a supermarket and you have to point at the baby calf and say, well, meet Roger. Hi, Bob, meet Roger. Would you like Roger or would you like Nick? And then you have to point at the guy, and they have to be, I think we're going to have to think twice. But a lot of people survived that way. There was, I mean, and this is where it needs to be understood in the context. Remember, our brains, one of the reasons why you and I are kind of intelligent and we can make sense of the things that we are talking about is because our ancestor ate meat at some point. Your frontal lobe cortex, where empathy is located, only evolved on the back and got bigger on the back of eating a lot of protein. So we needed to eat animals to feel sorry for animals.
Wow. Wow.
That's a curveball right there.
Woo. More a catch-22.
Absolutely. But, and that's where the conversation becomes so valuable. Is how do we do this? And remember, there is lab-grown meat that is happening right now. You can buy a steak for $100 in Singapore. With economy of scale, is going to get cheaper. If you can have a beautiful, juicy piece of steak, and I'm not talking fake. This is the real thing. It's stem cell and tissues, and no animals have been killed.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good to me.
It's the perfect combination. It's the full protein. It's made from the human tissues. Sorry, the animal tissues. So it's a proper piece of steak. But it's too expensive right now.
Like the replicator on Star Trek. It's the same idea. It just changes the molecular structure without killing any animals. Yeah, this is like just as good. Wow.
Now we've reached the end of the show, but we've got a few questions. And guys, if you want to shoot a couple of quick questions before we'll let you go. So John is asking, I'm not sure if you know about the background of this Masih al-Najdat and Ayaan Hirsi Ali have started a movement that will snowball into Middle Eastern women's rights in the near future. You're aware of this movement?
No, sounds good. I've never heard of it though.
Yeah, Ayaan is a good lady. I mean, she suffered a lot, and she's got a good story to tell. And especially, we're talking about she's Black, African woman, Muslim. God, she had a lot to deal with, and I think she should be a good one to confront that.
That's great news.
Robert is asking about what about genetic memory? There are more evidence. So we have something called epigenetics, where you've got gene markers, and some of the markers can only be defined upon interaction with social events. It's almost like nature interacting with nurture to create you. So we used to think there were the clean slate, the blank slate. I think Steven Pinker wrote a book about that. But now we understand that we are a very intriguing mixture of genetics and epigenetics, where your genes are interacting with events, creating a unique you.
I guess Lamarck wasn't so far off target after all.
I was thinking, so he was up to something, but he was talking about acquired. So if you lose a limb in a war, your offspring will be born without that limb. That's what it's. But kind of, because we're saying, well, no, nurture and environment has now something to say about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Can free will result in various effects? Evidently, but I don't think there is free will. I think there is a feeling or an illusion of free will. And again, we're not the victims of that illusion. I think we're the beneficiaries of the illusion. The amount of effort that you have to exert in your brain to actually make every decision conscious, you'll have very few things done on a daily basis. It's a bliss that we have that pre-consciousness. We've got the unconsciousness, and we can operate on different levels with different attention levels to do a lot more in our daily basis. But our actions, whether they are conscious or not, yes, they do have various effects. It's butterfly galore when it comes to human interactions. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, you could say how that there are only so many options for the result of an action defined in certain ways, and something is going to determine whether it's heads or tails. And the answer, I think, is not what Whitehead said, though I'm probably misunderstanding him, that there is some kind of vague principle of concretion where from the possibilities a concrete course emerges. Problem is, what is this decider, this concretion? I don't know that he ever said, but thing, a chance ricochet of a molecule or something. There's got to be something that causes it to come tails or heads. There's no real randomness. You just are in no position to see what it was. So that would still be mechanically deterministic, but the illusion of freedom and chance is the result of us not knowing, not being able to see the causation in action. So it's still a matter of, and why are we surprised? Because there are things about us, our abilities, and our upbringing, our attention span, etc. Then so everything is caused just nihilo, and so presumably everything must happen as it does. But I think of the analogy of like characters in a novel. It's kind of like Flatland. You know, they say, well, imagine a world where there were only two dimensions. We would know of stuff that's going on, but the poor inhabitants of the two-dimensional world would not. That's like characters on the page of a book. Frame reference, it's as if they didn't know what was coming. They're making decisions, but of course it's all mapped out by the author. That, I think, is the problem with any Christian doctrine of predestination. If it were true, you wouldn't be aware of it. You couldn't be. But at any rate, I think that is what is happening, basically. It is all predetermined, not with any reason in mind, but it's just that you build certain angle and they're gonna go here, there, and the other way, but you don't know why or how, so it seems spontaneous to us. There's more going on than we can observe, so it seems free. Well, I'm glad it's that way. It'd be pretty boring otherwise.
Yeah, we'll take a couple of last questions, guys. I'm just going to take this comment. Even though I am vegetarian myself, but I eat mussels and things that don't have central nervous system, brains, and consciousness. Because it depends on why you're vegan or why you're vegetarian. If it's a dietary thing, mine is to do with pain and suffering. And if the animal I'm eating doesn't have central nervous system and therefore can't feel a thing, I don't have an ethical problem myself. This one here is for you, but I think because a lot of people might be listening to you for the first time and thinking, because of your fascination of religion and stories, that you might be have a supernatural sort of worldview. Does Dr. Price believe in supernatural explanations?
Well, I don't think supernatural explanations are explanation questions. If somebody has a spontaneous remission, their cancer is gone. Wow, what happened? Well, I can't just jump to say, well, I guess an angel probably touched him and magically healed him. Maybe it did. How do I know? What do I know? But that is not an explanation. It's just as much of a mystery. It's like saying, well, how'd the world get here if it wasn't created by? Well, the answer is like the little kid knows to ask, who created God? That's a way of saying you're just trying to say, I got the answer to X. Of course, it is Y. It is Z. Well, that you're just solving a mystery with another mystery. That's I think ultimately the suppose you found out there was a creator, intelligently designed the world and all of this. Um, and that Jesus really did these miracles and that God parted the Red Sea and all that stuff. How did they do? There be like Thales way back. He said, okay, Zeus causes it to rain, but how does he do it? And that's when science was born. There must be some way he does it. The Quran says, he saith unto a thing, be, and it is. Fine. How does his saying bring it into existence? I mean, there must be some way. There's some vibrations in what he that come about. I mean, is it like radio waves that are invisible, but we know how that transmits sound? It's amazing. Because if there isn't any way in which it happens, you're just talking cartoons. And so it seems like the idea that Jesus was really using advanced terrestrial and we just didn't understand it. Well, suppose that turned out to be true. I think if there were miracles, that's what they would be. And that's not supernatural. It's just part of natural stuff that we don't yet understand. So I'm not sure there really is a difference between natural and supernatural. So do odd and paranormal things occur? Well, unexplainable things do. But you think you are them when you said, well, a saint answered my prayers or a demon caused this. I don't think there's enough evidence to say you've got the right cause there. There's some way to explain it or it wouldn't be happening, and we just don't know it yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we're always looking at seeking aliens, and some of the species on Earth are the closest thing to aliens. They look very strange. They're very strange to us. And when we first examined quantum mechanics, even Einstein himself got him quite spooked. You know, it's like this is magic. This is not even. That doesn't make any sense. And so, before you try to look for the supernatural, look for things you don't understand in life. Because as you rightly pointed, Bob, once then you've understood them, then you've just increased your natural understanding of the world. The answer is always going to be natural, because the word supernatural itself has a certain connotation. It means something that couldn't be. And if it couldn't be, then you won't be able to perceive it in the first place, because you are made, and your brain is made to perceive matter, energy, and things that you can't perceive. If there's a dimension that is blocked from your vision and perception, there is nothing you can do. It's almost like you're a 3D animal and there's a 7D world. You won't be able to perceive it. So there is no point of talking about it. You know, you're just going to contemplate until the cows come home.
Yeah, I don't mean to ridicule the idea that there's a supernatural. It's just upon examination, it seems to me it collapses on almost the definitional factor of how does God raise the dead? How does God make their way? And if so, then it operates according to natural laws that we don't yet know about.
Yeah, I've always wondered about the logos, the words, and uttering of words to get things done. And I thought this might be laggy, you know, because a computer system or any systems in the world is rated on the back of its response. So you open an Excel sheet, and if it's an old system, it might take 10 seconds. If you upgrade your machine, you upgrade your RAM, and it's a better machine, it opens in 5 seconds. Ultimately, you want things to open instantaneously if it's a really good machine. And for God to devise a way that takes few steps to achieve, because so first you've got to think the thought, then you utter the word. Obviously, the word then has, meanings. It will sort of expand into the void. Something then responds to the voice of God and becomes evident. While to me, somebody who can imagine something in their mind and voila, it's there, it's a lot quicker. You don't need words, or you don't need intermediate steps to achieve what you want. So it seems to me that this God needs a bit of an upgrade, because to me, a more superior God is the one that if something happens in the brain, and that's still laggy, now we know that the brain think about things 5 seconds before they happen. And probably God's brain wouldn't be immune from that. But there is that lag I never understood, and the need to utter words. It's almost like the magician before an act. They have to say abracadabra. Back in the day, it's abracadabra, and then something happens. We're accustomed to the ritual of saying something magical before it appears in front of our own eyes.
He saith unto a thing, be, or abracadabra, and it is.
It's fascinating. I know it's getting late for you, Bob, and I really thank you so much. This is wonderful. This is going to...
yeah, I love it. Yeah, I'm glad you came up with this idea.
The series are going to go down in history, because, this is going to be a collection of all the taboos. We talked about racism, homosexuality. Today we talked about sexism. We're going to be talking about abortion, free will, and vegetarian diets, and all that sort of stuff. This is going to be brilliant, and I'm going to be very, very proud for years to come. And I'm very, very thankful that I exist in the same era as you are, Bob.
I appreciate it. I'm thankful to exist.
Whatever that
you're
means.
Very special, and the fact that we're doing this is you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Next week, we are going to be tackling abortion. Stay tuned, and goodbye.